The fire alarm pierced the night sky, echoing across Manhattan's Upper East Side. Red strobes danced on the glass of an 80-story penthouse as smoke curled out from the shattered windows. Paramedics shouted. Elevators jammed. Chaos reigned. From the thick cloud of caramel and scorched velvet, he emerged tall, commanding, ash-dusted tuxedo clinging to his sculpted frame. In his arms, she lay unconscious, her chocolate-toned skin glowing against the white of her chef's apron, smeared with blood and creme brulee. A security guard ran to him, breathless. "Mr. Westwood, who is she?" His arms tightened around her body. For the first time, his voice cracked. "She's my wife, and I don't give a damn if the world burns down around us. I am not losing her." Then, 3 months earlier, Danielle Matthews didn't even know his name. She'd never believed in grand romantic gestures, not the cinematic ones. Anyway, but that night in the rooftop of the Apex restaurant, string lights flickering above, cityscape glowing beneath, Danielle had dared to believe in love. She had a ring in her pocket, hand trembling as she walked toward her boyfriend Ryan. Tonight was the night. Except Ryan wasn't alone. He was holding Kylie's face in both hands, kissing her like she was the oxygen he needed. The same lips that had once whispered forever to Danielle were now brushing against someone else's. "Ryan." Her voice broke like a cracked eggshell. He turned, too fast, guilt blooming across his features, but Kylie just smirked. "Oh, honey," she purred. You really thought he was going to marry a line cook? Danielle didn't speak, didn't cry, just dropped the velvet ring box onto the rooftop floor, turned, and walked straight into the pouring rain. That moment wasn't just heartbreak, it was incineration. She didn't see the black Bentley until it stopped inches from her knees. The rain blurred the headlights into halos. A man stepped out, umbrella barely open, his suit drenched, his presence seismic. "Miss." The voice was low, controlled, British accent, slight, seductive, dangerous. She was about to walk away when her vision blurred. Her knees gave out. She collapsed into his arms, unconscious. He didn't ask questions. He carried her into the car and told the driver, "Lenox Hill, emergency room, and don't stop for red lights." The hospital was silent at 3 a.m., except for the beeping heart monitors and hushed voices. Danielle woke to the scent of antiseptic and the warmth of a cashmere coat tucked around her shoulders. The man sat across from her, elbows on knees, watching her as though she was a riddle no one had solved. "You passed out," he said simply. "No major injuries, just heartbreak, I assume." She studied him now, striking jawline, day-old stubble, piercing gray eyes that didn't blink often. He looked like someone who owned a private jet, or 10. "I didn't catch your name," she muttered. "I didn't offer it?" The next day, Danielle returned to work at Apex, only to find her locker emptied. A notice taped to her station. Terminated violation of conduct. Signed, Kylie D. Her hands shook. Her voice cracked when she pleaded with HR, but the damage was done. She was nothing now. No job, no love, no reputation. So when her phone buzzed with an unknown number and a calm voice said, "Come to 555 Madison Ave, 42nd floor. I have a proposal," she had nothing left to lose. He was waiting in a steel gray suit, backlit by a window that framed the entire city. "I need a wife," he said, "for 6 months. In return, I'll clear your name, fund your culinary business, and pay you $2 million. Danielle almost laughed. Is this a joke? I'm a billionaire. Miss Matthews, I don't tell jokes. The room went still. He approached her, slow and deliberate, until they were only inches apart. My grandfather's will states I only inherit Apex Group if I settle down. He's dying. He's obsessed with legacy. And after you saved him from collapsing in that restaurant last week, he chose you. Her breath caught. That old man. In the booth. That was your grandfather. He nodded. You saved his life. I intend to repay the debt. But why me? You could marry a supermodel. He smirked. Supermodels don't make Michelin-quality lobster bisque. Her cheeks flushed. She should have walked out. But instead, she said softly, Where do I sign? They married in secret, a courthouse, 2 signatures, no vows. The next day, she was moved into a penthouse in Tribeca. 3 rules. He told her, 1, don't enter my study. 2, don't ask about my past. 3, never fall in love with me. She nodded, but inside, a slow ember had already been lit. In the weeks that followed, the lines blurred. He tasted her food with reverence. She caught him watching her across the kitchen island at midnight. They shared wine, laughed once or twice. Then one night, while chopping basil, their fingers touched and didn't let go. He leaned in, voice husky. You're breaking Rule 3. She whispered. You're breaking all of them. Their kiss was slow, like a fuse catching fire. But just as it bloomed, it shattered. At the Apex Company Gala, Danielle overheard a conversation in a hallway she wasn't meant to walk past. I told you, a woman whispered. The only reason he's with her is to close the deal. After 6 months, she's disposable. Danielle stood frozen. Behind her, a door creaked. Sean. Their eyes met. I can explain, he said. No, she whispered. You already did. And she walked out of the gala, out of his life without looking back, until the fire, until the building ignited with betrayal, until Calintha jealous rivals chef-treed to erase her from this world, until Sean ran through smoke and flames to bring her back. And now, as he held her under Manhattan's burning sky, nothing else mattered. Because real love doesn't burn away. It survives, even fire. And this was just the beginning. 3 months earlier, it was supposed to be the best night of Danielle Matthews' life. She had rehearsed the speech 5 times that morning, twice in the mirror, once on the subway, and once in the walk-in freezer when no one was looking. Her hands were still trembling slightly when she slipped the velvet box into the pocket of her apron. She didn't care that she smelled like truffle oil and rosemary. Ryan loved that about her, so she thought. He'd always said she was the warmth in his cold world. That when he came home after double shifts, it wasn't the food that comforted him, it was her. That being with her reminded him of something real, something grounding. That her hands, even with calluses from too many chopping boards, were the only ones he wanted to hold. So tonight, on her 29th birthday, she was going to propose. Not in a grand way. No flash mob, no fireworks. Just them. The rooftop garden above Apex Restaurant. A few candles she'd snuck up during prep, and her heart on the line. She opened the door to the rooftop storage, expecting to find Ryan checking on the wine stock. Her heart was thudding, almost annoyingly loud in her ears. But what she found, what she saw, froze her to the marrow. Ryan wasn't alone. His back was to her. But she knew that frame. that posture, the way he always tilted his head right before kissing her. Only, the woman in his arms wasn't her. It was Kylie. Of course it was Kylie. Tall, blonde, razor-sharp cheekbones, and a voice like peppermint venom. The pastry chef who'd been eyeing Ryan ever since she joined. The one who called Danielle kitchen help under her breath. The one who always laughed too hard at Ryan's mediocre jokes. Danielle stood motionless. She didn't drop the ring. Not yet. Not until Kylie opened her eyes mid-kiss, noticed her, and smiled like a predator spotting prey. "Well," Kylie said smoothly, pulling back just enough to glance over Ryan's shoulder. "I guess the surprise is on you. Honey?" Ryan turned. Guilt flickered across his face, then he masked it with something worse. Indifference. Danielle's throat tightened. She tried to speak, but no words came, just the sound of blood roaring in her ears. Kylie tilted her head, mock concern in her eyes. "Oh, come on. Don't look so shocked. Did you really think he was going to marry a line cook with oil stains under her fingernails?" Ryan winced. Danielle looked down at her apron. Olive oil had splattered earlier when she'd been searing duck. She hadn't even noticed. She was still holding the velvet box. It suddenly felt ridiculous, heavy, childish. She stepped forward. Not with rage, not with drama, just quiet devastation. She opened the box, took one last look at the silver band inside, then let it fall. The sound of the box hitting the concrete was soft, but it echoed like a gunshot. Then she turned and walked away. No words, no tears, just rain. The moment the stairwell door slammed shut behind her, her vision blurred. Not from crying, not yet, but from the gut punch of betrayal. Her body moved on autopilot. Down the stairs, past the kitchen, past Richard asking if she was okay, past the front door, and out onto the sidewalk. And then the sky broke. The rain came down in thick, cold sheets. Her breath steamed in the cold air. People passed with umbrellas. Cabs splashed puddles. Someone shouted at a bike courier, but Danielle heard none of it. Her feet moved, but she wasn't walking toward anything. She just needed to get away. She reached the intersection at Madison and 55th. Soaked to the bone, her curls dripping, apron clinging to her legs. The streetlight flicked yellow. She stepped off the curb, and a sleek black car swerved, tires screeching, stopping inches from her knees. The impact never came. But the sound, the scream of wet rubber against concrete, brought her out of her daze. She gasped, stumbled back. The passenger door swung open without warning, and from the driver's side, a man stepped out. Umbrella in one hand, phone in the other. His voice was clipped, precise, British. "I'll call you back." He slid the phone into his coat pocket and stepped around the car. She saw the tailored coat first, then the face, sharp jawline, clean-shaven, a scar just beneath his left eye. Like he'd once been cut with truth. His hair was tousled, damp from the rain, eyes a pale steel blue, controlled, cold. He looked like he belonged in a Tom Ford ad, or at the top of a Forbes list. She blinked. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "You nearly got yourself killed," he said flatly. "I wasn't watching where you were going." "Obviously." She bristled, the sting of the betrayal bubbling up into irritation. "I didn't ask for your commentary." He studied her, slowly, like he was reading a story written in bruises beneath her skin. "You're shaking," he noted. "I'm wet," she snapped. "You're also bleeding," he said, nodding toward her knee. She looked down. There was a gash, probably from tripping on the curb. Blood diluted with rainwater trickled down her leg. His voice softened. Barely. Come on, I'll get you cleaned up. No, she said, backing away. I'm fine. You're not, he said calmly. And don't flatter yourself. I'm not doing this for you. My grandfather's blood pressure would spike if he found out I left a woman bleeding in the rain. She stared at him. The words were callous, but there was something behind them. A flicker. A thread. She didn't know why she followed him into the car. Maybe because she was tired. Maybe because she was cold. Maybe because for once, someone wasn't trying to pretend they cared. They just acted. She didn't even ask his name. The car was warm, quiet, expensive. She sat stiffly, hands in her lap, watching raindrops race across the tinted glass. He poured scotch into a crystal glass and handed it to her. She hesitated. I'm not trying to poison you, he said dryly. I don't drink. He shrugged and sipped instead. Suit yourself? What kind of man carries a full bar in his car? She asked, voice tight. The kind who doesn't have time for bars. She tried not to stare, but there was something magnetic about him, detached, like the world didn't touch him unless he allowed it. The silence stretched. She finally asked, Why did you stop? He looked at her, eyebrow arched. Would you rather I hadn't? Danielle closed her eyes. No, tonight's been hell. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, so, you were in love with someone who didn't love you back? Her head snapped toward him. Excuse me, your eyes are bloodshot. You're wearing mascara, slight smudge under the right eye, and you're still wearing an apron. He took another sip. Let me guess. You left work to surprise him and walked in on something educational. Danielle turned to the window. You're an asshole. Yes, he said, not denying it. A beat. What's your name? She asked softly. Sean. She didn't ask for a last name. Didn't want to know? Not yet. But 3 days later, she'd learn it anyway. Sean Westwood, the city's most elusive billionaire, CEO of Westwood Holdings, silent owner of Apex Restaurant, and soon her husband. She just didn't know that yet. The sterile brightness of the hospital room buzzed against Danielle's skin. Her senses slowly returned one by one, the antiseptic scent in the air, the crispness of hospital sheets beneath her, the dull ache behind her eyes, and the soft hum of something expensive jazz coming from a speaker near the door. Her body was still trembling from cold or adrenaline. She couldn't tell which. The last thing she remembered was rain, headlights, and his voice, smooth as silk but with an edge like a blade. She opened her eyes fully. The room wasn't a standard ER cubicle. It was private, pristine, dressed in soft gray and warm lighting, the kind of hospital suite reserved for the 1%. Seated across from her was Sean, still in his rain-damp coat, his hair slightly tousled. He didn't look at her immediately. He was scrolling through something on his phone, posture relaxed, like he owned the building. Maybe he did. When he finally lifted his gaze, his tone was neutral. You fainted. You're severely anemic, mildly dehydrated, and apparently haven't slept in 48 hours. She blinked at him. You stayed. He ignored the question, his expression unreadable. The doctor says you'll be fine. You just need rest, and maybe to stop giving your heart to people who don't deserve it. That last part came out quieter, as if it surprised even him. Before she could answer, the door opened. An older man in a silk suit and oxygen cannula wheeled in, pushed gently by a nurse. His eyes were sharp, bright behind a veil of illness. and the resemblance to Sean was instant. The jawline, the posture, the way he seemed to command attention without needing to say a word. "Is this her?" the man asked, voice gravelly but dignified. Sean stood. "Grandfather, you should be in recovery. I feel fine." And I wanted to see her with my own eyes. His gaze moved to Danielle, and for a beat, she felt exposed in a way she hadn't expected. Judged, weighed, seen. Then unexpectedly he smiled. "You saved my life, young lady," he said softly. While others froze, "You acted. You didn't know who I was. You had nothing to gain. That means something to me." Danielle's lips parted. I thought you were a regular." "No such thing as regular in this city," he interrupted with a smirk, "especially not when your name is stitched into half its skyline." He leaned forward, and because of that, "I've made a decision." Danielle glanced at Sean, confused. Sean's eyes had narrowed slightly, jaw tight. The old man took a deep breath. "I want you to marry my grandson." Danielle stared at him, "Too sorry." The old man's smile didn't waver. "You're intelligent, brave, unshaken under pressure. Everything this family lacks lately. I want someone like you beside Sean. Stabilize him, ground him." Sean's voice was low, taut. "Grandfather, this isn't necessary." The old man ignored him completely. "If he doesn't marry someone like her before I die, I'm cutting him from the will. No Apex, no Westwood Holdings, nothing." Danielle almost laughed, because the absurdity was so beyond what her brain could compute. "You want me to marry him?" she asked, stunned. After 5 minutes of conversation, the old man met her eyes. After 5 minutes. "I know more about your character than I do about most of my board members after 10 years. "Grandfather," Sean warned, steel in his tone. The older man raised a brow. "You've never brought a woman to see me. Never stayed past 5 minutes in any hospital. Now look at you sitting here, watching over her like your life depends on it." The air between them shifted. Dense, electric. Danielle opened her mouth, but Sean spoke first. Turning to her, his voice was quiet, devoid of flourish. 6 months. That's all he needs to see. 6 months of marriage. Then you walk away with $2 million. No strings, no headlines. I'll make it airtight. Danielle blinked. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack," he said dryly, and for a moment, just a sliver, she wondered what his heart looked like behind all that marble. But then she shook her head. "No, I'm not for sale." She swung her legs over the bed, stood too fast, and caught herself on the railing. "I appreciate the offer. I really do. But I've already had one man lie to my face this week. I don't need another pretending he cares just to keep a business empire afloat." Before anyone could say another word, she left the room. She didn't look back. The next morning, Danielle walked into Apex to find chaos, a silent room, cold stairs, Kylie waiting with a smug smile, and her locker empty. Manager Richard called her in with 2 guards flanking the door. "We've reviewed camera footage," he said, tone clipped. "It shows you tampering with inventory, contaminating pastry ingredients. That's sabotage, effective immediately. You're terminated." Danielle's blood ran cold. "I never would. That's insane. I didn't touch anything." "No use lying," Kylie chimed in from behind. "You were jealous. You knew I was up for head pastry. You wanted to ruin my big moment." Danielle turned to her. eyes blazing. "You're the one who ruined everything. You stole." Richard raised a hand. "Enough. Leave your keycard at the desk." Danielle stood frozen. Humiliation burned hot behind her eyes. Everything she'd built, every 14-hour shift, every sleepless prep night, gone. And then, a silence swept through the hallway as the elevator doors opened. Sean Westwood stepped out, immaculate in a charcoal coat, black gloves, and the expression of a man used to commanding nations. The room shifted like gravity had just changed. He walked directly to Danielle. "You're done here," she said quietly, almost broken. His gaze swept the room. Everyone shrank. He turned to Danielle, his voice even. "Marry me." She froze. "What I told you. 6 months. No questions. No obligations after. I'll clear your name. I'll buy this restaurant if I have to. I'll make sure you never serve another hour under someone who doesn't deserve you." Her breath caught. "I'm not trying to save you, Danielle. I'm offering you the chance to fight back with power instead of pain." She searched his face. "Why do you care I don't?" He said simply, "But I don't like to see something exceptional get buried." It was a lie. Part of one, at least. But in his eyes, she saw it, the flicker, the truth behind the ice. Danielle didn't say anything for a long moment. She turned toward Kylie, then back to Sean, and slowly, quietly, she nodded. Outside, snow had begun to fall over Manhattan. Danielle stood next to a man she didn't trust, wearing borrowed strength and a wounded heart. But somewhere deep beneath the exhaustion and betrayal, a new fire began to kindle. Because if she had to fall, she'd fall into something that couldn't be burned. This wasn't a rescue. It was war. And the first move had just been made. The penthouse was colder than she expected. Not in temperature, Sean's place had radiant floors and central heating that whispered through the air like a secret, but in soul. The moment Danielle stepped inside, she felt it. The silence, the precision, a kind of luxury that was less about comfort and more about control. Every item, every sharp-lined piece of furniture, every abstract painting, every spotlight in the ceiling was perfectly curated and perfectly lifeless. It looked like a billionaire lived there. But no one truly lived there. She didn't say a word, just stood by the towering windows, watching the skyline flicker in the glass as if New York itself was holding its breath. Sean finally spoke. "3 rules," he said, pouring whiskey into a tumbler like this was any other Tuesday. She turned to face him. 1, don't ask me about my money. 2, don't go into my room. And 3, he paused, as if the last one weighed more than he was ready to admit. "Don't fall in love with me." She blinked. The audacity of that last rule hit her harder than she expected. "Is that an order?" He met her eyes, voice steady. "It's a warning." Danielle didn't flinch. Fine. They signed the contract that same night. 6 months. No press. No guests without notice. No social media. He paid for everything. Lawyers. Notarization. The whole performance. She walked into this arrangement clear-eyed and unromantic. At least, that's what she told herself. But what no one mentioned, what no clause accounted for, was what happened between the hours of 7 p.m. and midnight. When the world was quiet and the kitchen was hers, it started small. She couldn't sleep. She always cooked when she couldn't sleep. Her hands needed motion. Her heart needed grounding. So, she turned on soft music and made cinnamon brioche. letting the rhythm of the dough soothe her. She didn't know Sean was watching. The next night, she made garlic butter risotto with scallops and didn't see the subtle crease in his brow begin to soften. By the third night, he joined her. He didn't say a word, just poured wine and leaned against the island while she moved with the kind of grace only earned through years of working 12-hour shifts. She wasn't trying to impress him. That was the difference. She wasn't performing. She was existing, fully, unapologetically herself. One evening, 2 weeks in, she served him duck confit with roasted grapes. He took one bite and set his fork down, eyes still on the plate. Then he looked at her. Something in his gaze flickered, like embers catching wind. "If you're a chef," he murmured, voice low and almost reverent, "the rest of the world should be ashamed to serve food." Danielle froze. Her hand tightened around the wine glass. "I thought you didn't compliment people," she said, half teasing, half breathless. "I don't," he replied. It should have ended there. But the air between them thickened. Something unspoken passed, warm, forbidden. His voice wasn't just praise. It was surrender. And for one terrifying second, she wondered what would happen if she stepped closer, just a little, just enough to feel the heat of his skin instead of the flame of the stove. Instead, she turned away and muttered, "You're breaking your own rule." "I know," he said. The next week unfolded like a test neither of them wanted to admit they were failing. She started leaving the kitchen door cracked, just enough to hear his footsteps when he returned late. He stopped locking his bedroom door. He never said anything. But she noticed. He started brewing a second cup of coffee in the mornings, even when she wasn't awake yet. The cup would sit on the island, still steaming. He never mentioned it. They spoke in silences, in glances across the room, in casual questions that lingered too long. "What did your mother cook when you were little? Did you always want to be a chef? Do you ever regret saving me that night?" No answers were simple. No moment was harmless. Everything tasted like the edge of something dangerous. One night, a storm hit Manhattan, snarling traffic and swallowing the sky in thunder. Danielle had just taken a tart out of the oven when the lights flickered and died. The emergency backup kicked in, washing the penthouse in moody amber. She found Sean standing by the window, tie loosened, rain casting shadows across his face. He looked like he belonged to the storm untouchable, carved from steel, but the expression on his face was quiet. Lost. "I hate the quiet," he said suddenly. Not looking at her, Danielle set the tart down. "Then why do you live alone?" "Because noise doesn't fix loneliness," he said simply. That was the night she told him about her mother, about growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a fried chicken joint in the Bronx, about learning to stir pots while doing math homework, about how cooking became the only thing that ever made her feel safe. He listened, not with politeness, with hunger, like her words were air. When she finished, he whispered, "You make this place feel like home." And for the first time since the contract, she felt her chest crack open just enough to wonder, what if he meant it? But desire doesn't follow rules, and neither did they. The night they broke, truly broke, wasn't dramatic. No yelling, no confessions, just a bottle of wine, a slice of peach galette, and 2 people who'd been circling fire too long without burning. She leaned over to take his empty plate. He caught her wrist, their eyes locked. No words, just heat. He reached up, fingertips brushing a crumb from the corner of her lip, and for 1 second, She forgot everything: the contract, the warnings, the pain. She leaned in. So did he. The kiss was slow, careful, like he was memorizing every second in case it was the only one. But when he pulled back, something in him shifted, not softened, hardened. "This shouldn't have happened," he said, standing too fast. "I told you not to. I didn't." She cut in, voice sharp. "You kissed me." "That was a mistake." "No," she said quietly, stepping forward. "What's a mistake is pretending this isn't real when it already is." He looked at her, torn like she'd never seen him. Like part of him wanted to hold her and the other wanted to disappear. "I don't do love, Danielle," he said. "I don't know how." She held his gaze. "Then let me teach you." But he didn't answer. He walked away. She didn't cook the next night. The kitchen was dark, cold again, like the first night she moved in. He didn't come home that evening, or the one after. And yet, every morning, there was still a cup of coffee waiting on the island, steam curling into empty air, as if he couldn't help himself, as if, even in silence, he was still trying to break his own rules. Danielle hadn't planned on entering the competition. Not because she didn't think she was good enough, she knew she was. But after everything with Sean, after the kiss, the silence, the ache that lingered in every corner of the penthouse where his presence used to live, she didn't have the energy to prove herself to a room full of colleagues who barely saw her beyond her apron. But when Richard announced the Apex Internal Culinary Showcase, promising a $200,000 bonus and the attention of senior stakeholders, something shifted. Not ambition, not revenge. Something quieter. A need to remind herself who she was before love came in the form of a contract and left her in the dark. Kylie smirked when she signed up. "Hope you've improved your seasoning, sweetheart. Last time I tasted your food, it needed a personality." Danielle didn't respond. She simply tied her apron tighter and got to work. She spent 3 nights perfecting her dish-braised short ribs in a spiced fig reduction, served over creamy parsnip puree with burnt citrus glaze. She tested it until her hands blistered and her fridge was bare. It was bold, risky, hers. The day of the competition arrived like a storm dressed in silk. The kitchen buzzed with heat and ego. Chefs sharpened knives like soldiers prepping for battle. Kylie's heels clicked too loudly on the tile floor. Her laughter shrill, taunting. But Danielle didn't flinch. She was calm, composed, focused. She brought her ingredients from home, labeled and packed in airtight containers. She prepped with precision, plated with love. Every brush of the glaze, every flick of sea salt, it was her story on a plate. And when the judges came around, faceless behind their anonymity masks, she watched one of them take a bite and pause. Just for a moment. But it was there. That moment of silence that only happened when food hit something deeper than hunger. Kylie watched too, and smiled. The kind of smile that didn't belong in a kitchen. When they announced the results, Danielle felt ready. But then in last place, Richard announced, Danielle Matthews, braised ribs overcooked, unbalanced, and overwhelmingly sour. Judges found the dish borderline inedible. Laughter, not loud, just enough to burn. Danielle froze. Sour. That dish didn't even use vinegar. Richard didn't meet her eyes. Kylie leaned in, brushing past with faux sympathy. Tough luck, babe. Maybe next year. Her chest tightened. That's not possible, she said under her breath. They must have tasted someone else's, or maybe, Kylie whispered, just loud enough for her alone. Your food's as forgettable as your existence. Danielle stood in the center of the kitchen as heads turned. Whispers, shrugs. Someone clapped politely for the winner, Kylie. Of course, and Danielle felt something collapse inside her. Not pride, not anger. Something softer, her faith. That what she gave her heart to wouldn't betray her. She didn't cry. She walked out. The next morning, Apex was tense, quiet. Word had spread fast Danielle's fall from grace. The sour scandal, the embarrassment. She entered the staff lounge with her head high and her palms clenched, determined not to break. Until she saw the black car, sleek, familiar, waiting outside the front entrance. She didn't need to ask. Sean had returned. No one knew he was the CEO. Most assumed he was just some aloof executive, never present, always moving. The kind of man who signed papers without ever meeting the people they affected. He liked it that way. Distance was power. But today, the mask cracked. He walked into the restaurant in silence. Dressed in a simple black coat, matching slacks, and a thin, medical-grade mask covering his face. Just enough to conceal. Not enough to hide the way the air shifted when he entered. All conversations died. Even Kylie straightened her posture. Richard greeted him first. "Sir, we weren't expecting a site inspection." Sean didn't answer. His gaze was already sweeping the kitchen, assessing, measuring, weighing. And when his eyes landed on Danielle, something flickered behind them. A ripple beneath still water. He walked past everyone, straight to her. Danielle's breath caught. He hadn't spoken to her in days, not since that night in the kitchen, not since the kiss that changed the axis of her world, not since he disappeared like a shadow at sunrise. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. She could smell his cologne amber, leather, and something clean, familiar. "I heard about the competition," he said quietly. She nodded. "It doesn't matter." His jaw tightened. "It does." Before she could respond, he turned, facing the room like a conductor about to cue an orchestra. "I want a replay of yesterday's event," he said. "Exact conditions, exact setup, every ingredient checked and verified, right now." Kylie laughed once. Awkward. "Sir," with respect, "the judges will be irrelevant." He interrupted, voice sharp as glass. There was tampering. "I want the footage." Everyone froze. Richard hesitated. "Sir, that might not be." Sean reached up and peeled the mask from his face. The silence that followed could have broken walls. A few gasps. Someone dropped a ladle. Kylie took a step back. Because now they saw him. Not a distant executive. Not a passing figure. Sean Westwood, CEO of Apex Group. Billionaire. Ghost king of the culinary empire they all served under. And he was furious. "Kylie," he said. Voice ice-wrapped fire. "You swapped Danielle's vinegar. You sabotaged her dish. You humiliated her in front of the team. And you did it with the arrogance of someone who thought they'd never be caught." Her face drained of color. "Isir, I would never." "We recovered the backup footage. You did. You're done here, sir. Please, security will escort you out. And before you try to take anyone down with you." "Yes?" "I've already spoken to legal." Kylie's protests dissolved into shrill denials as 2 guards stepped forward. She reached out, desperate. "You can't do this. She's nothing. She's not even a..." I said out. Danielle watched in stunned silence as Kylie was removed, her heels dragging like aftershocks. Then Sean turned back to the room. "From this moment forward," he said calmly, "Danielle Matthews is the new executive chef of Apex." Gasps again. But Richard started. "She's the only person in this building who cooked something that made a judge pause mid-bite. She deserves the title." Danielle couldn't move. Her mind refused to catch up. He faced her again, softer now. "I told you, I don't rescue people, but I do correct my mistakes." She searched his eyes. "Why now?" He took a step closer. "Because watching someone destroy what you love is a particular kind of hell. And I won't let it happen again. Not to you." Her voice trembled. "You broke all 3 rules." His eyes didn't waver. "I'm about to break the 4th. There wasn't a 4th. There is now." "What is it?" He leaned in, voice low. "I don't just want you in this kitchen. I want you in my life. And I'm done pretending otherwise." And in that moment, surrounded by gasps and stares and the echo of power shifting hands, Danielle didn't see the billionaire. She saw the man who kissed her like she was fire and he was freezing. And this time, she didn't walk away. The kitchen was quiet. Not in the way it usually was after hours sterile. Empty. Still smelling faintly of garlic and ambition, but in the way a stage feels just before a final act. Tension in the walls, heat simmering under surfaces. The kind of quiet that begged to be broken. Danielle stood barefoot on the cool tile floor, still wearing her chef's coat, her fingers absent-mindedly toying with the edge of a dish towel. She hadn't gone home after the announcement, after Kylie was removed, after Sean looked her in the eye and named her the new executive chef in front of everyone. She needed to stay in the kitchen to remind herself it was real, that the stove, the cutting board, the battered copper pans, they were hers now. Not just by effort, by title, by right. But the moment she heard the door behind her click open, she knew. Sean. His presence didn't need footsteps or introductions. It moved into the room like gravity, heavier than silence, stronger than breath. She didn't turn around. "You stayed," he said softly. "I needed to feel it." She replied, "Just to know it wasn't a dream." He stepped closer. His voice was lower now, rougher. "It's not." She could feel him behind her, not touching, just close enough to shift the air. Danielle finally turned, slowly, carefully, like anything too sudden might shatter what hung between them. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top, sleeves rolled to his forearms, hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his fingers through it. He looked nothing like a CEO, and everything like the man who had kissed her once and regretted it publicly, who had banished himself from his own emotions, then come back just in time to ruin every wall she'd built to forget him. "You were incredible today," he said. "You didn't just survive that kitchen. You owned it." She gave him a half smile. "I thought you didn't believe in compliments." "I didn't," he murmured. "You changed that too." There was a pause, filled only by the soft hum of the fridge and the whisper of the city lights outside the wide windows. Then he stepped forward, closer now, close enough that his hand brushed her hip. "I meant what I said," he whispered. "There's no contract between us anymore. No mask, no rules, no pretending." Her breath caught. "Then what is this?" His eyes burned into hers. "This is real." And then he kissed her. Not like the first time hesitant, careful, testing the edges. This time, it was possession, permission, a crash of all the things they'd spent weeks holding back. His mouth on hers was heat and hunger, and something dangerously tender. He pulled her closer, hand gripping her waist, and she melted into him like she'd belonged there her whole life. The kitchen disappeared. The world shrank. Nothing existed except the point where his body met hers, where his lips pressed truth into her skin. She pushed her hands into his hair, tangled, soft, alive. He groaned against her mouth like he'd been starving, like he'd waited too long to finally taste something real. He lifted her onto the counter, lips never leaving hers, their bodies aligned like instinct. Her legs wrapped around his hips, their breaths tangled, heartbeats sprinting. She reached for the buttons of his shirt, fumbled, paused, looked at him. "Are you sure?" she asked, voice barely audible. His reply was a whisper against her jaw, almost reverent. "I've never been more sure of anything." And then they unraveled. In the place where they had built boundaries out of fear and rules out of pride, they let go. He kissed her like he'd built a life of silence just to find someone worth breaking it for. She touched him like he wasn't made of power or reputation, but of skin and longing and promises no one else had heard. Later, much later, when the heat had softened and the world returned, they lay tangled on the worn leather sofa in the corner of the kitchen. A throw blanket lazily draped across their bodies, the glow of the oven light casting gold on their bare shoulders. Danielle traced a finger down his chest, her voice quiet. "So, now what?" He looked down at her, a slow smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Now, I figure out how to be someone who doesn't lose what he never thought he deserved." She propped herself up, eyes serious. "You don't have to fix yourself to be with me." "Sean." He reached up, brushed a curl from her cheek. "I'm not fixing myself for you. I'm doing it because, for the first time, I want more than survival. I want life. I want us." Danielle let that sit for a moment, the honesty of it, the weight. But then, as if fate refused to let them breathe, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his jaw clenched. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer at first, just sat up slowly, the warmth between them replaced by a creeping cold. "The board," he said finally. "They're calling a vote. Someone's trying to push me out of Apex." Her blood ran cold. "What? Why?" "Because I exposed Kylie," he said bitterly. "Because I've made enemies. Because I've broken rules they liked hiding behind." Danielle sat up beside him, wrapping the blanket tighter around her. "What can we do?" Sean looked at her, eyes no longer soft but burning with something else. Resolve. Fury. "They want a scandal. Let's give them the truth instead." And as the night slipped deeper into darkness, Danielle realized the fire between them wasn't just passion. It was war. And they'd burn the whole city down before they let anyone tear it apart. The Apex anniversary gala shimmered like a night stolen from a dream velvet gowns. Gold chandeliers, champagne that cost more than rent, and a string quartet playing love songs that never ended well. Danielle stood near the glass wall, watching Manhattan glow through the raindrops trickling down the windows like melting diamonds. The city looked far away from here, almost unreal, just like her life lately. She wore a deep crimson satin dress chosen by someone from Westwood's PR team. But when Sean had seen her descend the stairs of the penthouse hours earlier, he'd gone silent, completely still. And then softly he'd whispered, "No one should be allowed to look like that." She hadn't said anything back, just smiled, letting the warmth bloom somewhere deep inside her, where the walls were finally starting to crumble. Now, as the evening unfolded, she caught herself searching for him. A nervous habit she hadn't fully acknowledged until it was too late to deny. Every time the crowd shifted, every time a man in a tailored tux passed too close, she'd inhale, not to breathe, but to feel him. She found him eventually, near the grand staircase, standing with his grandfather and a few board members. He looked polished, unreadable, dangerously composed. The mask he wore at work was different from the one she knew, the man who kissed her with reverence, who whispered her name like a prayer in the dark. This version of Sean was guarded, powerful, and utterly untouchable. She wasn't supposed to be near him tonight. Not as his wife. Not officially. The marriage was still under wraps, part of some delicate corporate balance she didn't care enough to understand. But watching him from a distance stirred something inside her. Longing. Yes, but also a whisper of doubt. And then she heard it. Not all of it. Not at first. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She'd only been walking past, slipping into the hallway behind the ballroom to escape the noise and the aching truth that she didn't belong here. But her name caught in the air like a hook. "You have to admit," the old man said, his voice gravelly, low but amused. "This little marriage trick worked better than I thought." Sean didn't respond immediately. Danielle's footsteps slowed, her breath stalling. "She wouldn't have looked at you twice otherwise." The old man continued, "You know that, don't you? You should be thanking me." The silence that followed was worse than denial. And then Sean's voice, cool, controlled. "It doesn't matter how it started." His grandfather laughed softly. "Of course it does. Perception is everything. You get the girl, I get the headlines. Everybody wins." Danielle felt the ground shift under her heels. Her throat closed, her hands, clutching the edges of her dress, trembled so slightly she almost didn't notice. Not a word of what she'd heard was new. Not exactly. She knew about the contract. She had agreed to it. But hearing it spoken aloud, stripped of emotion, turned into strategy, it was like watching someone rewrite her love story into a press release. She waited for Sean to defend her, to say she meant more than that. That this what they shared wasn't just convenience. But no such words came. She stepped backward, heels soundless on the carpet, slipping away before either of them saw her. Her chest ached with something she couldn't name. She wasn't crying, not yet. But the ache was deep, buried in bone, like grief that had no form. Outside, the rain had turned to a soft drizzle. Danielle pushed through the side doors and into the cold without grabbing her coat. She didn't care. The wind hit her bare shoulders. Her skin prickled. But she kept walking. Down the marble steps, away from the glowing chandeliers and the champagne smiles and the man who had given her his name only to cheapen it with silence. She walked until the streetlights blurred, until the sound of traffic drowned out the roaring in her ears. The hem of her gown was soaked. Her curls frizzed under the drizzle. But none of that mattered. All she could see again and again was his face, still and composed, as his grandfather reduced her to a well-executed tactic. She wouldn't have looked at you twice otherwise. God, it hurt, because the worst part wasn't that it had started as a lie. It was that she'd believed it had become something else, that the touches were real, the glances, the breathless kisses in the kitchen, the way he held her at night, even when she pretended to be asleep. She thought she'd crossed a line with him, that they'd both stepped over the boundary of fake into something recklessly, beautifully real. But now it felt like the truth had never crossed that line with them. Only she had. Alone. A car pulled up beside her. His car. Black, sleek, familiar. She didn't stop walking. Danielle. His voice cut through the night, sharp and shaken. She didn't turn. The door opened. Footsteps. Then his hand around her wrist, not rough, but firm. Danielle, please, let me explain. She stopped. Still didn't face him. Why? Her voice was quiet, hollow. So you can spin it. Tell me how it wasn't what it sounded like. He exhaled, stepping in front of her, eyes searching hers. You weren't supposed to hear that. Right, she whispered. Because it would have been easier to keep me in the dark while you cashed in on your legacy, and I played the role of the perfect pawn. His face fell. No, it's not like that anymore. I swear to you, that was before I knew what this could be. Danielle stared at him, trying to find truth in his eyes. And what is this now? Sean, a chapter in your redemption arc, a footnote in your PR strategy. He stepped closer. It's real. What happened between us is real. What I feel for you. She cut him off. You let him say those things. You didn't defend me. You didn't say I was more than some lucky accident. You didn't say you loved me. His lips parted, but no words came. And that silence was the answer. Danielle took a breath that didn't reach her lungs. That's what I thought. She pulled her wrist from his grasp gently, and for the first time since they met, his hand didn't follow. I came into your life because of a lie, she said, voice steadier than she felt. But I gave you something real, and I deserved the same. She turned and walked away, her heels echoing down the wet pavement like the ticking of a clock that had run out. Sean didn't call after her this time. And somewhere in the space between two heartbeats, something fragile shattered quietly in the rain. The rain had stopped, but Danielle couldn't feel it. The city was loud as ever honking taxis, distant sirens, life roaring on, but inside her chest, everything was still. She stood in front of the rusting gate of her old apartment building. The bricks looked duller than she remembered. The hallway smelled the same cooking oil, floor cleaner, and faded dreams. She hadn't been back since moving into the penthouse, since marrying him. But tonight, after everything shattered at the gala, she needed something real, something familiar. Even if it was only the creak of the hallway floor beneath her heels, or the dim light that flickered above the elevator with a quiet, tired buzz. She didn't notice the shadow until it moved. Fast, too fast. A cloth, the stench of chemicals, and then darkness. She woke to heat. At first, she thought it was her own panic. The burn in her chest, the roar of adrenaline. But it wasn't. It was smoke. Real. Thick. Choking. She was tied to a metal chair in a warehouse that smelled of gasoline and rot. The walls were concrete, stained and crumbling. Shelves of old restaurant supplies loomed like ghosts. And near the far wall, a familiar face twisted with something between hate and obsession. Colin, a former sous chef at Apex. Talented, but always second best, always behind Danielle. The night she was named executive chef, he quit without a word. Now he stared at her with glassy, unhinged eyes. I gave my life to this craft. He spat, and you just appeared, The girl from nowhere. The fake wife with her golden husband and her golden title. Danielle struggled against the ropes. "Colin, listen to me." He slammed a canister to the floor. Gasoline sloshed. "Do you know what happens to futures soaked in fuel?" Her blood froze. "I'll burn it," he said, smiling. "I'll burn you. And then maybe, finally, people will remember me." He struck a match, and the world ignited. The fire spread too fast. Danielle coughed violently, lungs screaming. The flames licked the shelves, consuming paper, plastic, oil. Heat shimmered, blinding. Her skin blistered from proximity alone. She screamed, not for help, for life. Sean wasn't supposed to be there. He hadn't slept. Not since Danielle walked away. He'd searched every restaurant, called everyone she knew. When her phone went dark and her old apartment reported no one answering inside, something in him snapped. The security team offered assistance. He refused. He ran. And when he saw the warehouse, when he saw the flame, she didn't wait for instructions. He sprinted straight into the fire. The heat clawed at him instantly, searing his coat, his lungs. Smoke swallowed his vision. But he screamed her name through it. "Danielle." He heard her cough, weak, fragile. Then he saw her, slumped in the chair, eyes barely open, ropes half burned around her wrists. He didn't think. He moved. In 3 staggering steps, he reached her, pulled his coat around her body, tore at the restraints with shaking, blistered hands. She collapsed into his arms, barely conscious. "Sean," she whispered, voice raw. "I've got you," he said, voice breaking. "I've got you. I'm here." The roof groaned above them. He didn't stop. He carried her arms burning, legs faltering through flame, through smoke, through hell. The warehouse exploded behind them the second his feet hit the pavement. Paramedics were screaming. Water blasted from hydrants. People ran. But Sean crumpled to the ground, still holding her. He collapsed sideways, body limp, smoke curling from his clothes. Sean Danielle screamed, rolling toward him, holding his face. "No. No, look at me. Look at me." His eyes fluttered, bloodied lips parted. "Stay with me. Please," she sobbed, her tears carving clean lines down soot-streaked cheeks. "You don't get to die. Not now. I haven't even told you." She choked, pressed her forehead to his. "I love you. Sean. I love you." For a moment. He didn't move, and then, barely audible, but real, he whispered, "I know." Her breath hitched. He reached up, one trembling hand cupping her face. "And I've loved you for longer than I can admit." Then his eyes slipped shut. The paramedics rushed forward, but Danielle kept whispering against his temple. "You're not leaving me. You're not a story I'll lose. You're mine, and I'm yours." And through the smoke and chaos and the sting of the fire, a new kind of flame lit inside her. Not one that destroyed, but one that refused to die. The beeping of the heart monitor was soft, rhythmic, barely audible over the hum of the hospital. The kind of sound that held time still, stretching it into something elastic and unbearable. Danielle sat at Sean's bedside, her fingers woven tightly around his. The bruises on his arms had started to fade into purples and yellows. The burns were healing. His breathing was steady now, his heartbeat strong. But he hadn't woken up. She hadn't left his side in 2 days. The world outside could wait. The fire, the police reports, The media storm. None of it mattered if he didn't open his eyes. She had whispered her love to him in the fire. Now she needed to say it to his face. So when his fingers finally twitched in hers, when his eyelids fluttered, and those sharp gray eyes found her through the haze, Danielle gasped so hard it turned into a laugh and a sob all at once. "Hey," he rasped. Voice sandpaper. Her hands flew to his face. "You're awake. Oh my God." You didn't leave," he whispered, like he still couldn't believe it. "I never will." He smiled, slow and soft. "Good." And then he tried to sit up, wincing, muscles protesting. But determination flared behind his exhaustion. "Sean," she said quickly, pressing his shoulders. "Don't rest. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He turned toward the drawer beside his hospital bed, reached in, pulled out something small, hidden beneath the folds of a folded sweater. Danielle froze. A box. Velvet. He opened it. Inside a ruby ring. Deep crimson, fiery, blood-warm, as if it had been forged from everything they'd survived. Not a diamond, not something cold or expected, but bold, raw, real, like them. And then, with effort, he shifted on knee, falling to the floor. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but intentionally. A man burned, bruised, brought to the edge of death, now kneeling like a warrior, offering peace. "Danielle Matthews," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "The first time we stood in front of each other, it was a contract, a negotiation. I wore a suit of armor, and you wore your pride like a shield. But now, I stand here with nothing but my heart." He looked up at her, eyes shining despite the pain. "No deal, no obligation, no pressure. Just one question: will you marry me for real? As the man who loves you. As the man who would walk through fire again, just to hear you say yes." Tears blurred her vision. Her knees buckled, and she dropped to the floor with him, arms wrapping around his neck. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes. 1,000 times yes." He exhaled like he'd been holding the breath for years. Slipped the ring onto her finger. It glowed against her skin like a promise. They stayed there for a long time, forehead to forehead. Two people who had burned, survived, and still chose love anyway. A year later, the neon sign of scarlet flame glowed like a heartbeat in the middle of the city. The grand opening made headlines. But what lived beyond the headlines was something rarer, a restaurant filled not just with flavor, but with fire and soul. Danielle designed the kitchen from scratch, every surface touched by her hands, every corner echoing her laughter and late-night music and wild ideas. She brought bold, untraditional pairings to the menu: crimson caramel with seared duck, smoked vanilla with dark chili chocolate. She said food should feel like truth, sometimes sweet, sometimes dangerous, always unforgettable. Sean handled the rest, the business, yes, but also the soul. He greeted every guest like they mattered, memorized their names, watched the way Danielle moved through the kitchen like it was a symphony written for her alone. They weren't just a power couple. They were a legend. Customers came for the food, but they returned for the story, the fire, the love, the spark. One night, just before closing, as they sat on the back patio beneath strings of gold lights and the hum of summer jazz, Sean's grandfather joined them. He looked older now, but kinder, There was a mischief in his eyes that Danielle had learned to appreciate. The old man sipped from a glass of red wine, then smiled at the couple across the table. "You two," he said, "have built something no empire ever could." Danielle smiled, glancing at Sean, whose fingers were laced with hers. "Thank you," she said sincerely. But the old man chuckled. No, I mean it. And you should probably know something." Sean raised an eyebrow. "What now?" The old man leaned in. "Conspiratorial? There was never going to be a will clause." Silence. Sean blinked. "What?" "You heard me." He waved a hand, unapologetic. "I never planned to cut you off. You're my blood. I just saw what was happening. Saw the way you looked at her and the way she made you human. I figured you two needed a little push." Danielle's mouth parted. "Wait till the marriage threat. Entirely staged." He admitted with a shrug, "But look how well it worked." Sean stared at his grandfather, somewhere between awe and annoyance. "You manipulated both of us." "Please," the old man scoffed. "I merely introduced the idea. You were the fool who fell in love." Danielle laughed then, a real laugh. Deep, warm, alive. Sean turned to her, still shaking his head in disbelief. "You know what the worst part is?" She leaned in, teasing. "Tell me. I'm not even mad." She grinned. "Good. Because your grandfather's meddling gave me the greatest thing I never thought I deserved." He brushed his thumb over her cheek. "You're mine now." She kissed him, always. Scarlet flame continued to burn, not with destruction, but with passion, with art, with love. Years from now, people would tell their story as if it were a fable, the girl who lost everything, the man who had it all, and the fire that forged them into something unbreakable. But for Danielle and Sean, it wasn't a myth. It was just Tuesday night. Hand in hand, covered in flour and caramel, arguing about wine pairings, kissing between courses, building something that tasted like forever. And when the last customer left, and the lights dimmed, and the world outside went quiet, Sean would wrap his arms around her waist and whisper the same thing every night. "I'd walk through fire for you." And Danielle would whisper back, "You already did."